Hi guys, welcome back to the barn. So this workstation has totally revolutionised the way I use this workshop. In a short while I'll take you through why that is. But firstly I want to take you through the way that I use this workshop at the moment, and also some future improvements that I will start to make in here very soon. So let's start outside, because that's really where the processes start for this space. So a couple of years ago I built this carport as an extension to the side of the barn. This actually replaced the much bigger structure that I inherited when I bought the house. The whole thing was maybe twice, maybe even 3 times longer than what you currently see today. But for various reasons we demolished much of it and left with this bit that I now call the barn and the workshop. This area here really is the start of my woodworking process. This is the goods inwards, if you like, of the small barn workshop. Primarily, of course, I built it to protect the car, mostly from the severe late spring, early summer storms that we have around here, which include a lot of hailstorms and actually do damage the car. It was much easier on the car insurance to have a covered parking area. But during the last 2 years of having this space, it's actually become quite useful for the workshop process. So first of all, it's where I keep all my materials. I have the old workbench that was in the workshop for a while. I built this years ago in the small loft workshop and then transported it here, and initially it was inside the workshop. And this shelf up here, it really is my main material for anything other than sheet materials. Also under here I've got my chop saw, and also sometimes I use my handheld circular saws to cut materials down to smaller sizes. From a future point of view, I would like to get rid of this bench and create a bench the full length of this workshop, which is about 20 feet long, and then I can have a proper cross-cutting station here, and also build into the workbench some provisions for my 1/2-inch router, so I can run larger pieces through my router without snagging on walls. It's also a really nice area to work in here when it's really hot, and conversely it's also nice when it's raining. So this has become a really functional area. And also, because I bought a trailer this year, and I bought a trailer that was large enough to take 8x4 sheets, and I've been trying that out in the last few weeks with the plasterboard for the bathroom build. I can actually just pull the trailer in here, unhook it, and there's still room to work round the trailer with the crosscut, or indeed actually cut the plasterboard up in the trailer. So this is the goods inwards and the first point of processing for materials in this workshop. And that's not any different from how a pro or a large workshop is set up. You have your goods inwards, material storage, and the primary breaking down of stock. So just pausing in this part, this is the small barn workshop storage area. So most of the things we've got here, I've got things I don't use very often. A lot of them are gardening, but I've got my plumbing, I've got my decorating, painting, I've got power tools that I don't use a lot, angle grinders, things like that. It's actually quite well organised. Down here I've got all my paints and stains and various other things, tapes. Obviously also it functions as our garden store, our lawnmower, trimmers. Then the other day I built this little bench up here for my lasers. I kept taking the lasers into the workshop, and then there was pretty much in the way. So just out of some offcuts I had around, I built this little eye shelf, which is my laser station. I've got tools up there, seldom used tools, but stuff that came from either the small loft workshop or duplications of tools. And under here I've actually got my Rage 5 saw, which has been redundant since I got the R255 saw, and also down there the DeWalt saw. Now I do plan to use at least one of these saws outside in that covered space when I get round to refurbishing that area, because it will be a good area just to break up stock before it comes in here. Here of course I have my pine parquet floor that I buy regular. I find plain square edge or PAR timber, it's very expensive here, but this pine parquet floor is good quality, and if you can work around the anti-cut grooves in the back, I really enjoy working with it. And then we go into the main part of the workshop. Of course, this is where I spend most of my time, and the area that I'm stood in now is where we park the tractor or the John Deere ride-on mower overnight. If I'm honest, I'd prefer it not to be in this space, but it's the only really place I've got to put it for now. Usually the first thing I do every morning when I come in here is open the doors and drive it either under the carport, or if it's a really nice day, just leave it outside. And I suppose the good thing about that for the tractor is it gets started every day, so it doesn't sit for 3 or 4 months over the winter and then it doesn't start in the spring. But this area here I probably won't do too much more with, other than finish and insulate this wall, and I'll make this wall quite robust because it has gardening tools on the walls, and also the tractor sort of scuffs up and down it. Probably eventually finish this wall. A few years ago, just as a experiment, I had a little bit of cement left and I rendered this little patch of stonework in the wall, so I'll probably end up rendering this wall eventually. But there is some things I still need to do in here to actually make this barn airtight, and I'll just pull this light out here. I've got an additional 600 square panel lighting, but it get that strobing effect on the camera, so I'll just pull it out because it's quite annoying to watch. I need to just finish this area here. There's still a hole over here, and there is an hole over here, so as I wrap up the ceiling I'll finish up these holes. So once I've cut my stock outside, once I've cross cut it and broken it down as much as I can, and then I bring it in here, and then usually it goes over the Evolution saw, and I use the Evolution saw mostly as a rip saw. My ripping gets done here. However, if I've got sheet materials, I'll set my counter levered bars up on the bench and then use the track saw. Most of the sheets I cut are cut with the track saw rather than the table saw. I just find it much easier in a smaller workshop, bigger sheets. It's actually easier to take the tool to the wood rather than the wood to the tool. Even though this router table here is a small area, it's what, 18 inch by 2 foot, I actually tend to spend most of my time marking out here, and I just like standing here, whether it's because I've got the view out into the garden, whereas here I've got my back to the everything, or whether it's because I usually dump my tools on here, and more on that in a minute, and this area is usually clean. I actually quite like standing here, and actually it goes back to the time when I used to work with my dad. I did a shop tour of my dad's old workshop a couple of years ago, and he has a universal machine, a Startrite, Robland Startrite 210, K210 I think it is. I'll put some footage over so you can see it. Actually, we always stood at the saw cum spindle moulder table to do all our marking out. Probably for very similar reasons, usually cluttered the bench up. So again, just to go back to that pro joiner's workshop flow, goods inwards, timber store, initial process of timber, bring it into the joiner's shop, rip your timber or break it down to initial sizes, bring it here and do your marking out. And once you've then done your marking out, then it's the next set of processes. Now there is a couple of weird intricacies about this workshop that I don't like. First of all, I would have preferred slightly wider workshop. And if anybody saw when I created this space a couple of years ago, I actually pinched about 18 inch of that side. The dividing wall was about here and I moved it over. That was as much as I could negotiate from the gardening store at the other side, but the carport has actually made up for that lack of space in here. But there's a couple of tools that don't quite work in here to my mind. One of them is the planer, and a lot of you have commented over the last few months about me dragging this planer around, and it is a, hello Bobo, dragging this planer around. The bandsaw on this little supported shelf works well. Not very often I want to cut something very long. I would say that in the 2 years it's been in this position, albeit I created this new cart as an experiment, I don't really need to move it anywhere. I've never really, I don't think, felt the need to drag it out into the middle of the workshop because I want to put something long through it. So it works there and that'll stay there. Yes, maybe in time on a wheeled cart. Now the reason that the planer is not on a wheeled cart, or indeed the bandsaw, is this floor is really uneven. When I decided that this space was going to be my workshop, I cast this lower section of floor, and this has pretty flat because it took a long time to cast this bottom section of floor. When I did this, it's actually cast in from, I can see now, about 10 parts. Some of them 2 foot square, some of them 6 foot by 2 foot, but it was all cast from concrete that I had left from other projects around the house. And primarily we just needed to cast this bit here for the parking of the lawnmower. So if I was running something like a planer cart or a bandsaw cart, which are quite top heavy, over it, I'd probably snag the floor and it'd fall over. And also if I get the planer on and you're putting long lengths through, you're going to topple the thing over anyway. So I'm not a fan of putting this on a cart. It's quite a slender size, but yet top heavy, especially when timber's going through. So my plan is, as crazy as it may seem, I'm going to try, when I zip this wall up over the next few weeks, is to build something that doesn't interfere with the tractor, hopefully doesn't interfere with me, and is somewhere here, and I can just run my planer lengths down, and I'll leave it as near that door as I can. So if I'm running, say, a 10-foot piece through, which I very rarely do, I could actually start outside and finish over there, make it. I'm not quite sure yet, but I think I'm going to try to do it here. Now that might just be crazy. If I had a wider workshop, I would probably totally copy the universal woodworking machine my dad has, with the saw, the spindle moulder, and put the planer on this side. The problem with that is not only would I need to shuffle all this over this way to accommodate the planer down there, but then I really need a walkway down that side so I can retrieve my timber as I pass it through, or else I'm walking right round this big lump of machine in the middle of the floor. So I don't really want to do that. So I think up there is a good place for it to go. But yes, if I'd have had a wider shop, probably considered sort of lumping it, bolting it onto the side of this. These are the shop dogs, by the way, if you've not seen them before, Gracie and Bo. Very important to the workshop functionality, very important for company in the workshop, and also some funny parts, especially with Bo's a relatively young puppy. It was only a few months ago that I was sat on this bench with her when she was a few weeks old. She's now 10 months old. She's still daft as a brush, but we absolutely love her, and it's always a pleasure to have Gracie and Bo in the workshop. I've only really done 3 things in the workshop this year. First of all, really importantly, I finally got electrics in. I think I did that in January. So the electrics are in. I've got a fuse board in. Yes, it doesn't look very well mounted because I keep moving it to do work to this wall. I've built this wall up to this level, plumb, stable, insulated, insect screened. I need to do this next bit here. That won't take me too long. That's probably a day's work, hopefully. I've already moved a shelf the other day so I can start to access this area. And then I want to remove this bench that's down here that I originally designed and built in the small loft workshop as a outside woodworking bench, but it's been stuck here and mostly covered in tools. At the moment it's got a bale of insulation underneath that I bought to insulate this wall. That'll free some area. I don't want to do this. Once I get this wall done, this bench will be going somewhere outside. I don't know where yet. Even might become part of the gardening setup. And I want to get some cupboards on this wall and also on this wall. But to do that, I need to put the ceiling in. Over the next few weeks, probably over the Christmas break, I'm going to insulate and board this wall and put the ceiling in up to at least the beam up here. The beam is central. In fact, I did do that this year as well. I made sure this beam was set, and there's 2 pieces of timber fixed to either side, which are the level of the ceiling. Once I get that ceiling in here, I know what space I've got for cupboards and tool storage, because I am short of tool storage. I've got 2 workbenches, I've got the space under here, and I've got these Festool drawers here. I have to say I absolutely love these Festool drawers, and the tools that I use the most are all in these drawers. I've got plans for another bench here, which I'll tell you about in a few weeks' time when I get round to building this bench. The shelves hopefully create a bit more floor space by getting rid of this. I'll get rid of this old kitchen unit, and then we'll get a ceiling in which will be lower, insulated, warmer, and then I can spread out properly these lights that are just screwed to a board at the moment. Really like these lights. I've got 7 of them. I've actually got another couple under the bench that I've never wired in. Eventually I'll scatter them around and hopefully get a good coverage. Really like them. I bought them on eBay quite cheap 3 or 4 years ago, and there was really cheap. I think there was something like, if you bought 3, they were about £20 for 3. So that brings me to talking about this workstation. Basically, this was inspired when Evolution sent me their Wnew R255 table saw back in April, around about Easter weekend. And initially I had my DeWalt set up in here, and I had the Evolution was just parked out of the way because I used to take it out into the garden. The DeWalt was stood at the time on a box, and because the DeWalt is much smaller, it balanced quite well on the timber box. But this is a lot bigger unit than the DeWalt. So initially when I first got it, when I first unboxed it, the unboxing video, I stood it on the box. After using it for a while, I decided I needed something a bit more stable and something more permanent. I built from the same box, and also this old kitchen unit here, I mocked up this build. I had the saw sat on the box, and I had the kitchen unit with my Triton 1/2" router in it, and I worked with that for a few weeks and just kept changing it until I liked it. The chassis that all this is stood on was purpose made for this, and I used this chassis for this build and also the mock-up. The old thing was too high. I'm not very tall, I'm only 5'7", so it was too high. I always felt like I was like this with the saw, so I designed it to be lower. And if you want the height of it, it's actually 35" 900. I built it with the saw in mind, and then Banggood sent me their tools. I asked them if they could send me this router plate and also the fence. And I have to say, in combination, this is fantastic. This top is made so it highs and lowers. Oh, there's a jet coming. The French practice low level flying around here, and by the time you've heard them, they've gone. Try and catch them on cameras. This top highs and lowers, so I can dial it in exactly to the height of this. The only slight drawback for this, for me, is that it works with a router. It's my Makita router is in here. Works with a router with a 1/4" collet. Over the years, when I was in the small loft workshop, I have the Triton TRA001, which is an 1/2" router, and I'd invested over the years on 1/2" router cutters. I much prefer them because they just don't break like a 1/4" router cutters do. Actually quite limited with the router cutters I have. I have invested in some new ones over the last few months. It's a shame that I can't fit my 1/2" router in this Enjoywood lift, because it's a really good lift. I really enjoy having it, and when you look at the price of it compared to a lift or an 1/2" router, it's very economical. The router fence I absolutely love. It's so well made, and whenever I make my new table for my 1/2" router, I will buy some more of these T-groove bars, set them into the worktop, and then this will just be my router fence of choice. I'll just take this to whichever router I'm using. And then the other week, when I got the hooked on wood coping jig, I just sandwiched this on the end to give it something to run. Yes, it could do again being in a wider table, and I am thinking of amending this slightly. This workstation is by no means finished. In fact, I started to build a drawer down here for my routers and never quite got round to finishing it. I still would say it's a mock-up. It's version 2 mock-up, and already I've got ideas how I could make this better, but at the moment I don't want to spend the time making it better because I want to do the workshop wall ceiling. A larger outfeed table would be nice. A larger table here would be nice, but it would have to be fold down collapsible, or indeed the same table I can move from here to there, whether I'm cutting or whether I'm routering. But what this table does do, it also gives me the opportunity to use these. Be honest, when I got these, I didn't think I'd use them that much, but actually I do, and I've used them on quite a lot of projects now. Now, first of all, it's really handy that the Wnew R255 has a traditional T-slot in it, so it works with it. Wouldn't work with the Rage 5, so that's really good. These are quite heavy, and when they're in the slot, they do tend to do that. So this table, not only is it a router table, but it actually supports this really well. Now I'm also contemplating, I've nowhere near designed this yet, some kind of structure at the front which would turn the saw into more of a panel saw. Now I had a curious comment yesterday from somebody who'd watched the unboxing video of this. Because I'd not done some cut testing, the kind of 5-edge cut testing that you do where you cut a piece 5 times and measure the diagonals. Now there's 2 reasons why I didn't do that. First of all, for me, my workflow doesn't, as I've said earlier, allow me to cut panels on here. I don't really cut panels on here. If I'm going to cut panels, I'll cut them over here with my track saw. So I'm not really bothered about my panel here. There is a limitation. As good as this saw is for the money, there's a limitation of this and other job site saws. That they've only got that much area between the front of the saw and the saw blade. It's not as though it's a panel saw where I can place an 8x4 sheet on here and run it through. If that was the case, then a square cut experiment would have been good, because I could have square cut a 3-foot square panel and measured it. But here, once I've got my guide on, I'm really down to 3 or 4 inch at best. So to cut a 4-inch square and measure it, first of all, it's a bit dangerous, and secondly, it's not really giving you much of an idea. Even if it was quite out of square, I'm sure a 4-inch square would have been acceptable in tolerance. That's why I didn't do that test. To make it versatile in a small workshop where you haven't got maybe a router table or you haven't got other tools, it would be nice to have that sharp fin riving knife on. I know Evolution are making it, and I know other users are now making their own. The saw, to me, is a great saw, and this combination is as good as I've so far found on a budget for a small workshop. The saw's what, £400? The router lift's £100, the fence is £100, and the router's £100. So for £700, I think I've got a good setup here. I'm happy with the setup I have, and it's useful, and I find, unlike my little router table I made here, which goes on the cantilever, which works perfectly, I really enjoy using it, and it's much more versatile in some ways because I have a lot of 1/2-inch cutters. I just find this as easy. It's set up. I have a rebating router cutter in there, a straight router cutter in there at the moment, so I can rebate on it, and literally I can cut some timber and rebate on it. Within 10 minutes, the job's done. It's perfect. And then I stand here, I usually do my sanding here and my secondary processes. This is just made out of furniture board. This is the cheapest sheet material that I could buy from my local shop. Could have made it out of melamine, probably slightly more stable than melamine, slightly more expensive. And I had to just tweak this, especially for the top, I had to just tweak it. It was just bowing with the atmospheric conditions. But I really like this, and I like the function of it. Yes, I can improve it. Yes, I could put more tool storage in, or I could develop it to do something else. It's not the finished article. There's a lot more I could do with this. At the moment, for what I'm doing, most of my woodworking projects are DIY projects around the house. This covers all my bases. If I got into more fine woodworking, if I was making furniture, then maybe I would need to change the setup. But for what I'm doing here, it would be fine. And actually, if I started making windows, I have no plans to make any windows yet, but this would be fine with probably a slightly larger router cutter, so maybe the larger router to rebate the windows. I could make windows on here quite happily. I could use the coping jeg to cut my tenons. I could also cut them on there. That is where the small barn workshop got to in 2024. And hopefully in 2025, because the majority of the major projects around the house are now complete, or will be in the next couple of weeks, I can spend a lot more time in this space doing more woodworky type projects. So I'm excited about that. So, one more thing. There's just one more thing I need to mention. The other downside of this is it's very heavy, and moving it is a pain. I eventually plan, it has actually got casters on, but because of the unevenness of the floor, it doesn't really roll. I've got to drag it, and I've actually got a wedge under that corner. Somebody spotted the other week on a video that it was rocking. It's pretty stable at the moment, but it was rocking. There's an hole in the floor down there that I need to repair. The wedge had come out, so it was a bit rocky, but I have a plan to make it more mobile, so I could, maybe not mobile enough to move it outside, but mobile enough that I could push it up to where you're stood now, and then create this space here. And then the bench that I'm thinking of putting here, I could bring here and have a bench I can work round. That's the plan. So I'm going to call that video here. Hopefully you was interested in the evolution of this workshop, but also in the plans for the next coming months and where this workshop will hopefully be headed over that period.